Pablos Holman, welcome to the Shred Truck.
Hey.
I'm really glad you're here.
Me too. Thanks. This is awesome.
Yeah, you were the keynote this morning, and man, my brain was blown.
Okay.
Blown up in really cool ways.
Okay, good.
And I wanted to start with
Shredding brains. You know, that's what we're here for.
We were your bio just blows my mind.
A lot of weird stuff in there.
I know, so much cool stuff. But you started early on with this concept this morning of deep tech versus shallow tech.
Yeah.
And I'd love to just get your sense of that, because I think we all think we're doing really cool tech. And
yeah, I think we aren't.
Yeah.
I think if you look at what tech means, it basically means iPhone apps. And you look at our life in the last 20 years, almost all the technology companies, all the tech products, they're basically just software. And
Right.
so to me, what it means is that, the tech industry, which is the industry that's supposed to be bringing us cool new superpowers, they just overwhelmingly got drunk on software. And that's all they've been doing for decades, and to the detriment of developing other kinds of technology, the kinds of things that could solve bigger problems than you can solve with just software. If you think about the big problems in the world that everyone relies on, it's energy, water, waste, food, sanitation, construction, manufacturing. These are things every single person relies on that you can't affect meaningfully with just software. You have to bring new technologies that are physical. And so now when we talk about deep tech, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about developing new technologies. They might seem a little harder, but they're going to go after bigger problems.
yeah, so you used a couple of examples that and you gave a stat conceptually that software is a $2 trillion industry.
Yeah, software combined, including Microsoft and Facebook and everybody combined, their revenue is about $2 trillion a year. And if you add in the chips and the data centers and stuff, you get to maybe $4 trillion. But global GDP is $100 trillion a year. So that stuff I was just describing, the food, software may be eating the world, but the world can't eat software. We need actual technologies to help us do a better job of producing food to feed everyone, to produce energy that everyone needs, those kinds of things. And that's what we mean by deep tech.
Yeah, and you talked about like the one that was so compelling to me, which is the whole clothing industry.
Oh, yeah.
Like the clothing, like you talked about the clothing industry, the size of the clothing industry, and how completely there's been no technology.
It seems
innovation.
like the kind of thing people just take it for granted, but 30% of the clothes manufactured in the entire world are never once worn by a human. So, and about 55% of the production ends up in a landfill in less than a year.
Astounding.
Yeah, it's the worst industry on earth, with the possible exception of oil, as far as, damaging waste.
Yeah. And in that, the technology part of it, there's been no evolution in the
There's
technology.
no tech in the apparel industry at all. I mean, it's interesting. It's an industry full of people who are good at copying stuff.
Right.
And they're really good at cutting costs, always usually by squeezing the guy below them to cut costs. So, there's a lot of stratification. Your designers are not your brands, who are not your manufacturers, who are not the distributors, who are not the retailers. And so it's just everybody's doing just their little part. And so nobody's in a position to really invest in innovation. They're all just making pennies. And so it's a staggering another $2 trillion industry that software isn't touching yet. And so I think, now we're at a point where we can finally develop automation so you could produce apparel on demand. So instead of making it 9 months in advance in a factory in Bangladesh and then wondering if someone the right size is going to buy it, you wait till someone clicks buy now, a robot makes your clothes and ships them out the next day. That's what's totally possible now. It was not possible up until this year.
Right.
Yeah.
So I wanted to start with those examples, because you also did concrete, and you did you talked about solar and how completely inefficient solar is, and I mean, give me a few, because
Well-
then what I want to do is dig into how you process this kind of stuff. Like, how
Yeah.
do you think differently about it to build a better future?
Yeah,
But give us a sense of some of the other stuff that's just so bass-ackwards that it's not moved at all.
Well, I'm cheating by using a superpower called arithmetic, which basically just means, take the math you learned in elementary school and get a napkin and a Sharpie and start adding things up.
Interesting.
And if you
Yeah.
do that for something like solar power is miraculous and it is amazing and it's a wonderful technology that we have. But the problem is we've sort of overdone it. And a really easy way to understand that is that we're trying to scale up, solar power in places where the sun don't shine.
Correct.
I'm from Alaska. It's the only place in the world where the sun shines around the clock. But
for half the year.
But only for part of the year.
Right.
The other half of the year, it doesn't shine at all.
Right.
So we don't do solar in Alaska.
Right.
And Germany has deployed a lot of solar, but their sun doesn't shine for half of the year. So it's not a complete solution. The solar energy relies on a miracle we haven't gotten yet, which is battery storage. So we would need enough battery storage to store the energy from the day to the night time or from the summer to the winter. Well, those things don't exist meaningfully. If you add up all of the battery storage in the world that's been deployed right now, you could almost power New York City through the night.
Through the night.
Yeah. And that's the whole world. So,
wow.
So we're really not talking about a solution and that's with the massive mining footprint involved in the batteries. It's questionable whether the cost's even working out. So we're having a really hard time making solar into a complete solution. So anyway, I use that as an example because I don't want people to keep pursuing solutions that won't work. We're out of time. We can't keep doing that. We got to do the math, figure out what's actually going to work. So I showed a couple of examples of things that would work. So if you love solar, there's an easy solution. You take the solar farm, put it on a rocket, and launch it into space. And so a solar farm in space would actually get sun 24 hours a day, get 8 times as much energy, and then it can beam the energy down to Earth using radio waves that go right through clouds in the middle of the night. And that is technically, I know it sounds like science fiction, but it's technically not hard. We know how to do it. We have all the technology to do that now. And the launch cost of using rockets has come down so dramatically that doing this will be so cost effective we can't afford not to. It's carbon-free energy that scales 24 hours a day anywhere on Earth. Don't need storage, don't need transmission lines.
Wow.
Yeah.
So let me step back a bit, because what intrigues me is you're known as someone who people bring in to help them figure these big tech questions out, these complex technology questions. And like, how does your brain go to work on this stuff? Like, I'm intrigued by what's going on inside your head all the time.
Well, I'm cheating by not having to have a normal job.
Yeah.
So, most people have to be heads down and focus on managing people or keeping their, sales up and all those things. That's very important stuff running a business. I get to play more, and I go to labs, and I go to garages, and I get to talk to the inventors who figured out how to do these new things, and then I try to help them. Can we help them get it out of the lab and into a startup, or how do we figure out a strategy to bring it to market? Sometimes it can be really easy. Sometimes you're in an industry where it's very regulated and it's really hard to do new things. So I'm trying to help those inventors bring those things to life. So
is what you do more consolidation of stuff you're finding, or because somewhat of your bio paints you as the guy who's making it up?
Well, I had a long career inventing new technology and working on developing some of these things. I was at a lab before that we started called Intellectual Ventures.
Yeah.
And with Bill Gates there and with Nathan Myhrvold, we were able to round up a bunch of prolific inventors, we got 6,000 patents on our own inventions there.
Really?
So it's
6,000 patents.
very large scale invention operation.
Yeah. So is that? I mean, because you're a known brand who does this, but when you're around, however many people in those labs,
Yeah.
and you're all like you, like not all like you
Oh.
exactly, obviously, but a whole bunch of people that it must be just a energetic force field space.
Well, optimally, that's true, and I wish it were like that more often. For me, that has been true multiple times, and I'm one of the very lucky people who got to have a career as an inventor.
Right.
But that's not a legitimate career choice. Nobody else has a business card that says inventor.
Right.
It's not one of the majors at college. So that's I got to do a lot of the things that these inventors want to do. Most of them, I would say, are working in isolation. They're not in a lab full of other, brilliant people. They're on their own, and that's that's not ideal. That's why I think they really deserve a lot of support. We invest in a tiny fraction of them and try to help them out. But even so, these people need a lot more support. I think they're very important. We should treasure them. Yeah, they're a little weird, sometimes a little dangerous. Might not want to hire them in your company, but these are the people who bring, the toolkit for humanity. Without them, you don't get any new technology by reading the directions. That's never happened once.
Right.
So the kind of people that are going to bring us our new superpowers, the ability to solve problems in a cleaner, cheaper, more efficient, more humane way, that comes from crazy thinkers, and they're in the garage with like wild hair and a DeLorean. So,
right.
We need to really find ways to support them. And unfortunately, it's one of the unsolved problems. It's not the job of universities. They're doing like research, basic science. How does the world work?
Yeah.
Answering those questions. On the other end, you have Silicon Valley or venture capital supporting entrepreneurs. That's how do you commercialize and make a business. But the part in the middle, that's invention.
Right.
How do you take the output of scientific research, ask yourself, does this change anything humans do or rely on? Can we do it better? Solve a problem in a better way? That's invention. And we don't have there's no place for invention, so it's very haphazard.
Yeah. So, those people are out in the world striving and struggling to do that. Part of what you do is try and find those people and support them. That sounds like a big part of.
I can't find them. They're in the basement. They got to find me. So
okay.
So that's why you see me. That's why I'm on the internet. Hopefully they find me. If you have a nephew who's in the garage doing some weird thing you don't understand, send him my way.
Okay. And so do people come to you and say, I've got this really cool thing I'm doing?
Yeah,
Is
all
that
the time.
how it works?
Every day, yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I try to listen to them, understand what they've got, and I get to see a lot of things, maybe more than anyone at the very early stage, and so I try to figure out which of these technologies has a real potential, what that roadmap might look like to bring it to life, and work with those founders and see if I can help them out.
Do you have some sort of criteria that says I work with this kind of person versus this kind of person?
Oh, yeah.
Because you have this model of deep tech versus shallow tech. Do you kind of say, it's cool that you're doing shallow tech, but I'm not interested? Are you really focused on deep tech?
Yeah. Every day I get email from people who are making enterprise software for insurance or healthcare.
Right.
Every one of those I can't do. That's not, it doesn't need my help, even if it's a good idea and it might be important. It just doesn't need my help. Other people will support those things. So I don't do almost anything that's purely software.
Okay.
Unless there's a real fundamental breakthrough, maybe a new algorithm for AI or something like that, then I might. And then if I look at, the other things we don't do, a lot of people would say they don't do assholes, but a lot of people who make a big difference are poorly socialized.
Right.
And so you need to put up with some of that. I wouldn't back people who I thought were too conceited.
Okay.
So one of the problems you have is like doctors, for example, tend to make really bad founders. And the reason is they spend a decade being told how smart they are. and being in a you could understand this because like in a hospital, it's life or death. Everybody needs to line up and do exactly what the doctor says. You don't question him. He's in charge. You do what he says. But after a while, you get a complex and you start to think you're as smart as everyone treats you. And so doctors tend to think they're smarter than they are. And they have a huge amount of knowledge and expertise maybe in their things. And they may have invented a cure for cancer. But the problem is they don't know how a startup works. I know a lot about how a startup works. But if you can't take advice from me about how a startup works, then I probably shouldn't invest in you.
Correct.
No matter how smart you are, because you're about to go on and play a game that you're not tuned for. You're the doctor. If it's time to save my life, I'm going to hand myself over to you and trust you. But if you're going to come do a startup, a tech startup, and I probably know more than you, so maybe you should listen. So I think that having a bit of humility is important. So you have to look for that in founders. And then I'd say I don't do things that are like 10% better. If you look in any industry, there are engineers trying to make things 1 or 2 or 10% better.
Right.
I don't engage until it's about 10x better. Right.
Okay.
If you have something that makes, automotive or aerospace or airplanes or recycling or energy or agriculture 10x better, I'm in.
You're in. Okay.
That's because then it's worth doing. It's expensive and long and slow and hard and to bring a new technology to life. And you don't want to do all of that because you're also fighting the machinery. You're fighting the incumbents who want to keep things the way they are. And so you need to be significantly better in order to make everybody get on board.
Right.
And so it's a rule of thumb. It's not always true, but that's about where in most cases you got to be in order for it to be worth all the effort.
So what are if you're open to share, what are some of the most interesting 10x opportunities you're playing with right now? What are the things that are blowing your mind in such a cool way that you're excited about? You get up thinking about it in the morning.
Yeah, like one of them that I really am excited about is simple, and I showed it on stage, which is we have these guys making cargo ships that are autonomous and they're sailing. So no crew, no fuel, no emissions. And there's almost no tech. I mean, it's not that hard to do. Teslas do self-driving. This is way easier. In the ocean, there's nothing to hit. So, the self-driving part is almost easy to solve at this point. And sailing has been working for centuries.
Right.
So now we just have a computer control the sails. And so you could have a cargo ship cross an ocean with no fuel cost. And zero emissions, and that is totally possible. Not that hard to understand. I don't think the shipping industry is going to get around to doing it, but we'll do it. And I think it's one of these cases where once everyone thinks it sounds crazy until we get the first ship going. Once that happens, then
that's so cool. So I saw that photo that you showed, and I'm thinking about these giant container ships that cross the ocean every day that are essentially, and you showed the pollution and all the stuff that they're contributing. Yeah. At the same time, it's not ultimately doing the work it needs to do.
Well, I think there was a time when it did, but fuel costs are much higher now.
Yep.
The pollution is adding up. The shipping industry it's kind of volatile based on, what's happening in geopolitics and markets and things. And so, you would want to make it more efficient. Right. And they actually have emissions standards, maritime emissions standards, supposed to reduce emissions by 30%. The only way to do that in a cargo ship is to go 30% slower. That's how they do it.
Got
it. And so, the sailing cargo ships are 30% slower. That is the downside. But because everybody else is going slower now, it's a even fight.
That's so. So you also were involved in a space, one of the rocket programs.
Yeah,
right?
I helped start Blue Origin 25 years ago.
And are you still involved in that?
Not
in
at
some
all-
way?
no, I'm not
Okay,
involved
you
at
just
all.
help get them
Yeah.
going, and then you go find another cool
Yeah,
thing
you
to
usually
build.
need me at the beginning
Got
once you're on a track to grow or do something that's been done before. You don't really need me.
Yeah. So one other angle I wanted to come at with you, because you're somebody who spots opportunity. You've had lots of experience doing this. So for Joe average people like me,
Yeah.
and an industry like we're in, which is shredding, which is
Sure.
as non-technical as it comes, it's kind of like the shipping industry in many ways. It's incumbent, sort of historical. It's very, you put a piece of paper on the side and you run it through a machine, and it comes out the end. It goes in the recycling stream. Instead of necessarily, but how can we do this in our own businesses? How can we be somewhat innovative, but not just because we put a new piece of software in, or we change that button, or how can we be more like you and less like us?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think this is a pretty good industry, but you've certainly ended up in places you didn't imagine.
Yeah.
We live in a world where information security is more important than ever. So the shredding is important, but the chain of custody for that information, what's happening, you're not only shredding paper, you're shredding hard drives now.
Yep.
What does that look like? How does that change now that all the hard drives are SSDs? What happens after SSD? There's a lot of it is a moving target even in this industry, and so I point that out because it's important to recognize. I think in every industry they're moving targets, and so I don't know what the answers are for this industry, but if you start looking at what are the real problems in the industry, so where are our costs, where are we inefficient? Probably if you can articulate that, I can find a technology that would make that 10 times better.
Right.
And then on, where this goes, you guys have people who are shredding, but you're also very highly adjacent to recycling, and you can see that happening. You have companies here who are trying to recycle or even just process the waste from like electric vehicles. What do you do with these batteries? Yep. I mean, there's a huge kind of unsolved problem there. A bunch of technologies that might help. But right now, it's very energy intensive. There's a lot of waste involved and damage involved in just trying to process old batteries and tires and cars and just all the stuff that Americans in particular
have built.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah.
It's the scale of it is staggering. And so, this is an industry where I know there are engineers here figuring out how do you make this thing 1% better.
Right.
And
a lot of that.
And there's a lot of that.
Incrementalism, right?
That's right.
Incremental improvement.
Yeah, but someday,
we're not doing 10x things.
Yeah, I'm going to come back in 3 or 4 or 5 years, and I'm going to have something that's 10x better.
Right.
And so, you don't want to be blindsided by that. You don't want the Uber playbook where, I have some little Silicon Valley startup that all of a sudden obsoletes your entire industry because I got something 10 times better.
Yeah.
You want to be the one to keep an eye on the technologies that are coming and figure out when and where I could be the one to bring that.
Yeah.
You guys know the people in the industry have this amazing superpower, which is the problems. You know the problem that needs to be solved. You know all the things that don't work. You know how to navigate it. You figured it out so far. That doesn't mean you're good at innovation, and I get that. I'm not saying that everybody needs to become an innovator, but what you can do is learn to keep an eye on the people who are innovative.
Right.
And learn, because they all need partners. They need customers. They need investors. They need folks who can help them pilot something or try it out. You could be that partner for the next technology that's coming, and that's where the winners are going to be found in old industries.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Any final words for our audience? I love the way you think about things. I love the way you come at them, and I feel like we needed to hear this because we're very guilty of that little incremental movement. But to anyone who didn't hear your presentation today, anyone who just has a chance to listen to this, what would your final words of encouragement, insight be to them?
Yeah, I think the main thing also that I like to try to get across to people is that we do have these technologies that can help in almost any industry for almost any problem. we have some technology that hasn't been developed, hasn't been deployed, but those are what's coming. And we're able to do that faster than ever. And I get to see a lot of these things, which makes me very excited and optimistic, and I see the possibilities. And I think that that's important. It's important to share these things so that other people can get a sense of the opportunity to make the future much more awesome. It's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, thank you for taking the time to share with us. We are deeply appreciative, and thanks for stopping by today into the Shred Truck studio.
Yeah.
And hanging out with me and talking about it all. So appreciate you immensely, and continued success changing the world.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Cheers.